At 15:37 hours, 3:37 p.m., a small dot appeared on the radar screen on board the U.S. Coast Guard ship called USCGC Hamilton, DEMSA 3. The ship was patrolling in the eastern Caribbean Sea when they spotted a fast boat with a steel hull cutting through the water at over 20 knots, about 23 miles per hour. The boat was running dark, which means it had no lights on. There was no tracking signal, no radio contact. It was like a ghost on the ocean. Seconds later, a second contact showed up on the radar. This one was larger, clearer, and moving in the opposite direction. They identified it. It was a Venezuelan Navy Guaycamacuto-class patrol ship speeding directly toward the Coast Guard cutter's path. Two ships were now heading toward each other like crossing bullets. Inside Hamilton's command center, alarms flashed red. This was not a normal drug chase. A foreign warship was trying to block an American law enforcement operation in international waters. At the command center in Key West, Florida, officers watched the live feed. They saw heat cameras, path tracking, and coded voice messages. Every eye was fixed on the screen as the distance between the two ships dropped below 1 nautical mile, about 1.15 regular miles. On the ship's bridge, the air was tense and hot. The commanding officer spoke only once. "Hold course. Record everything." The Caribbean, calm and blue a moment ago, had turned into a chessboard of nations, and within minutes the United States Coast Guard was about to face the Venezuelan Navy on the open sea. At 15:41 hours, 3:41 p.m., the radar signal grew clearer. The second contact was now confirmed. It was a Venezuelan Navy Guaycamacuto-class patrol ship with a steel gray hull slicing through the Caribbean at 22 knots. Its path was deliberate, cutting directly across the U.S. Coast Guard ship Hamilton's path. The air on the bridge became heavy. Officers leaned over radar screens, watching the paths come together within a mile. The Venezuelan ship had the clear outline of a gun mounted on the front and a radar dome. It looked like a military ship, not a regular boat. Hamilton's radio called out on open channels, but no reply came back. The silence itself became a message. In the command center, technicians adjusted radio frequencies, watching every blip and echo. The operation had started as a law enforcement stop against a suspected drug runner. Now a foreign navy had entered the situation. Two different missions, policing and showing strength, collided on the same spot. At 15:44, 3:44 p.m., far to the south, the suspected go-fast boat continued its desperate run. The fiberglass hull bounced across the waves at 45 knots. Engines roaring, fuel pouring from twin tanks. Heat cameras showed 3 heat signatures on board, crouched low, throwing objects overboard. Each splash left a pale cloud on radar. These were packages meant to disappear before capture. Hamilton's command deck moved into combat readiness. The flight crew rolled the MH-65 Dolphin helicopter to the launch position, while the rigid hull-inflatable boat was armed and lowered for the chase. Everything happened with careful precision. Harnesses clipped, cameras rolling, rifles sealed under spray covers. No panic, only careful steps. At 15:46, 3:46 p.m., the helicopter left the deck. Rotor wind scattered mist over the back of the ship. From above, its sensors painted the scene in bright contrasts. One smuggler fleeing, one Navy ship moving to block, one Coast Guard cutter trying to hold authority in the middle. Hamilton adjusted speed to match the closing pattern. The Venezuelan warship held its course, crossing in front of the American ship at less than 800 yards. Both hulls plowed through crossing wakes. One wrong move could crash the steel ships together. Inside, the helmsman's hands tightened on the wheel. Radar operators marked every second. The crew knew the rules: no aggression unless attacked. Keep recording everything legally. Save evidence for review in Washington. Every second was history in the making. At 15:49, 3:49 p.m., from above, the Dolphin's camera tracked the Venezuelan ship shadowing Hamilton's side. The warship's running lights flickered once, maybe a signal, maybe coincidence. On the deck below, sailors looked through binoculars, reading body language across the distance. Crew on rails, helmets on, but no weapons raised. It was a standoff made of patience rather than gunfire. For a brief moment, the horizon was split between red clouds and the shiny glint of 2 flags. Stars and stripes on one side, yellow, blue, and red on the other. The only sound was the twin rhythm of engines pushing against the sea. At 15:53, 3:53 p.m., the smaller smuggler boat suddenly turned north, back toward the intercept zone. Whether from panic or planning, the move dragged all three ships into a collision triangle. Hamilton sped up. The rigid inflatable boat dropped into the water with a thud, engines screaming as 6 boarding officers sped toward the small boat. Overhead, the Dolphin lowered altitude, rotor wind flattening the waves. Its pilot released a single red flare streaking across the sky, a universal warning shot without violence. The flare burned above the water, casting red light over the Venezuelan ship's bridge windows. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then the chase started again. The inflatable boat carved through the spray, closing distance meter by meter. The small boat's crew, blinded by floodlight reflection, hesitated. The inflatable slammed alongside, boarding hooks caught, and the American team jumped over the side. Within moments, the outboard engines went silent. At 3:57 p.m., from Hamilton's bridge, the scene unfolded through binoculars and heat camera feed. Movement, struggle, then stillness. The traffickers were stopped. The drugs confirmed. Over a ton of cocaine and chemical ingredients drifting among broken bales. At that same moment, the Venezuelan patrol ship stopped dead in the water, engines at idle, floodlights sweeping white across the waves. Its bridge crew stood motionless behind glass, neither hostile nor welcoming, only watching under the duty of their country. Hamilton held position, bow angled west, keeping 1,000 yards of silence. Only the hum of generators and the rhythm of the sea filled the empty space. Every direction, heading, and hull number was recorded. The encounter was now more about endurance than action. At 4 p.m. in Key West, analysts studied live feeds in near silence. 2 armed ships locked in international waters, neither able to leave without giving up the story. On board Hamilton, discipline held firm. The inflatable boat team secured evidence. Technicians logged samples and timestamps. Crew changed stations with quiet precision. At 4:04 p.m., the Venezuelan ship edged closer, wake brushing the current like a whispered warning. Lights dimmed to navigation beacons, a deliberate reminder that the space remained contested. Inside Hamilton, gestures replaced words. Calm, deliberate, unshaken. Restraint, not reaction, defined the moment. At 4:08 p.m., as twilight deepened, both ships lingered in quiet defiance. The helicopter circled above, recording every frame for history or politics. Then, almost like a ceremony, the Venezuelan ship turned west, her wake spreading and fading into darkness. Hamilton waited until radar showed her gone before easing forward again. The crew finally breathed, knowing they had done more than stop smugglers. They had faced a foreign navy without firing a single shot. The log entry was brief. Hostile interference, no engagement. In the stillness that followed, engines hummed and deck lights dimmed as the cutter went back to patrol. The danger hadn't ended. It had simply gone quiet. In Washington, the video would soon arrive. What the nation's leaders decided next would determine whether this incident remained a small conflict at sea or the spark of something far more serious. At 16:27 hours, 4:27 p.m., Eastern Time in Washington, the situation was already moving through secret channels. The feed from U.S. Coast Guard ship Hamilton, live video, radar logs, and coded information arrived at the National Security Council. Every agency with a stake in the Caribbean watched in silence. Homeland Security, the Pentagon, Southern Command, and the State Department. On the wall-sized display, 2 dots glowed over the digital map of the Caribbean. One red, one blue, circling, holding distance, refusing to back down. What began as a drug stop was now classified as hostile maritime interference. The term sounded technical, but it carried weight. In military law, it meant a foreign navy had challenged a lawful U.S. operation in international waters. Analysts briefed the leader. Venezuela had been following American operations since early September, after 2 of its smuggling ships were destroyed by coordinated Coast Guard Navy actions. Caracas had called the U.S. pirates, and new satellite pictures showed Venezuela sending additional patrol boats near Grenada and Dominica. The Hamilton incident wasn't an accident. It was part of a pattern. The president wasn't in the room yet, but his national security advisor was. The discussion turned from tactics to public perception. Every camera on board Hamilton had recorded the Venezuelan ship's move. Every second of restraint now served a purpose, proving American discipline under pressure. No one suggested making things worse. Yet no one proposed retreat either. To withdraw would invite it to happen again. To respond militarily would set the hemisphere on fire. The room settled on a middle ground. Hamilton would keep patrolling, record every provocation, and hold position with full authority to defend itself. The Coast Guard was told to save every bit of data for Congress and diplomatic review. In the dim light, screens flickered between feeds. The smuggler's deck, the Venezuelan hull, the U.S. flag lit up by rotor wash. The meaning was clear. America had just been tested not by firepower, but by nerve. And somewhere between those glowing screens and the midnight Caribbean, the question lingered. How long could restraint hold before it began to look like weakness? That question would soon find its answer at sea, where silence ended and the real test began. At 17:02 hours, 5:02 p.m. local time, the sun slid toward the horizon and turned the sea a shiny gold. But nothing about the picture looked peaceful on board U.S. Coast Guard ship Hamilton. The cutter held a steady 20 knots, bow lifting and settling in a slow rhythm as it tracked the smuggler's last known position, roughly 5 nautical miles ahead. At the stern and a little to port side, the Venezuelan warship's silhouette sat on the horizon line like a blade, dull gray, unblinking, not communicating, shadowing at a measured distance that was close enough to be felt, too far to be challenged without consequences. Above, the MH-65 Dolphin carved wide, careful circles. Through its heat camera, the world became simplified. 3 bright cores suspended in a triangle of pressure. The dead-in-the-water go-fast boat, the Venezuelan cutter holding off the quarter, and Hamilton broad-shouldered in the center, owning the geometry of the engagement. The helicopter's downward wind rippled the surface. Spray broke apart and drifted back in the light easterly wind. On Hamilton's bridge, the white lights were already killed. Only instrument glow painted faces, range rings bearing marks, speed displays sliding in steady steps. In the command center, operators worked in a low murmur, gloved hands on trackballs, thumb wheels and push-to-talk keys. Every console carried the same tension. Procedures executed exactly because precision was the only thing between a clean stop and a headline no one wanted. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. Swell 1 to 1.5 meters. 12 to 14 knots of wind out of 0-90 degrees. Whitecaps smoothed by the dying light. The smell of hot steel, salt, and airplane fuel hung in the air. At 17:09, 5:09 p.m., the flight deck signalman's wand dipped once. The rigid inflatable boat cradle pins released with a metal clack. The 26-foot over-the-horizon inflatable boat kissed the surface, flexed on its shock-absorbing seats, and then the twin outboard engines bit. The boat pushed through the chop and sped up hard, spray shooting away in silver sheets. 6 boarding officers hunkered down behind the console and collar. Coxswain steady on the throttles. Boarding officer kneeling behind him with tablet and checklist. Engineer scanning gauges. Bow hook ready with the grapnel. 2 cover officers sweeping arcs with their sights. Kevlar vests creaked against webbing. Night vision visors were flipped up, ready to drop. The go-fast boat drifted sideways to the swell, a streak of rusty paint above a scuffed fiberglass hull. The water around it sparkled with torn bales, white plastic ripped open like paper ribs, leaking powder into the blue in thin cloudy trails above. The Dolphin held station at about 350 to 400 feet, rotor disc beating the dusk. Its heat camera showed 3 human heat blooms pressed low behind the console and engine well. The approach sequence looked like a diagram brought to life. The inflatable boat slid in from the downwind stern quarter to stop the smuggler from turning into the wind. Speed matched to drift. Engines softened. Bowline thrown. Grapnel grabbed. Collar to hull. Fenders biting. Movements were small, exact, and fast. Bow secured. Deck swept. Engine controls turned off. Kill switches pulled. The boarding officer flowed past the console into the front peak. The cover pair locked the angles that mattered. Hands, waistbands, engine covers. In under 60 seconds, the noise changed character from open throttle, chaos to the controlled hum of idling outboards and short-clipped acknowledgments over headsets.cargo lay stacked in the well and under a low tarp. 1.1 metric tons of cocaine and fentanyl ingredients by rough estimate, bundled in plastic wrap bricks. Tape edges slick with seawater. A digital camera recorded 360-degree sweeps. Evidence tags clicked into place. GPS timestamps burned into the corner of every frame. Above, The Dolphin completed 2 confirmation passes, then turned toward Hamilton for fuel, its camera lens swiveling to hold the Venezuelan ship inside the frame until the last second. At 5:16 p.m., the Venezuelan patrol ship moved inside 200 yards. The forward gun mount rotated a few degrees off the deck, raised high enough to say, "Armed, not aiming." Searchlights flickered, narrow beams sweeping and pulling back, drawing chalk lines on the water as if sketching a boundary no one else recognized. On Hamilton's scopes, the warship's X-band return thickened with each tiny course correction. On the electronic surveillance panel, a thread of emissions rose and fell, the electronic version of a glance. In the command center, one console operator logged every change, bearing to a tenth. Range to the yard, light patterns, engine speed estimates by wake shape. Another operator wrote down the tracking signal silence and radar behavior. No voice traffic, no challenge, only posture. The watch supervisor's finger traced a fixed wedge on the large display, the safe water cone that Hamilton would not give up. The cutter's captain watched from the bridge wing, rain jacket collar up against the rotor wash eddies coming off the helicopter deck. The restraint was muscular, felt in forearms and jawlines, because every instinct in a body trained for control wants to do something when another hull shadows close. The Venezuelan ship offered no voice, no flag signals, only the low, even hum of turbines and the glow of deck lights. A language of presence, a presence designed to be photographed. At 5:22 p.m., Hamilton eased her throttles back, engines holding just above idle as the inflatable boat raced home through the waves, its bow rising under the weight of seized cargo glistening with seawater. On radar, the Venezuelan cutter remained a steady heartbeat of steel, motionless yet defiant, neither closing nor drifting away, content to let tension fill the space between. The sunset faded from gold to iron gray, and the sea flattened into a dark mirror where 2 hulls, one American, one Venezuelan, faced each other across a single mile of still water. What began as a drug seizure had become a test of composure, a quiet duel of discipline and authority. The air itself seemed to hesitate, heavy with the knowledge that one wrong move could turn silence into incident. Above them, the Dolphin helicopter traced slow circles, its red lights turning like embers against the dusk. From that height, the scene appeared timeless, Hamilton's orange and white hull gleaming faintly against the shadowed gunmetal of the Venezuelan ship, their reflections trembling on the calm surface. On deck, sailors secured evidence under forensic light, the blue glow cutting through mist and salt spray as they moved with the precision of ritual. At 5:31 p.m., darkness closed in until the sea and sky became one. The flag at Hamilton's mast fluttered beneath a single lamp, its motion slow and steady like breathing. Across the empty space, faint silhouettes moved under Venezuelan searchlights, visible enough to warn, vague enough to threaten. Whether they held cameras or rifles, no one could tell. And that uncertainty was exactly the point. Inside the cutter, every second was recorded. Times, directions, lights, communications, and temperature readings, all filed like the pulse of an ocean holding its breath. Overhead, the Poseidon's orbit turned the standoff into data, a mosaic of heat and radar echoes meant for archives and analysis. The Caribbean night grew thick with vibration and waiting. Every clang, hiss, and metal tick echoed as if made louder by restraint itself. Yet neither ship moved. Neither voice broke the silence, and the mile of black water between them became something fragile and powerful at once, an unspoken agreement that peace, for now, would hold. At 5:39 p.m., a faint trail appeared high above, an orbiting P-8A Poseidon spy plane, sending visuals to Key West. Its sensors captured everything: heat blooms from Hamilton's engines, radar pulses from the Venezuelan cutter, even the shimmering wake of the inflatable boat returning home. The United States now had a complete digital record of the standoff, proof against any accusation to come. In Washington, analysts were already classifying the incident as gray zone conflict, aggression conducted below the level of war. It was the modern battlefield of the 21st century. No gunfire, no casualties, just willpower under the microscope. At 5:46 p.m., the Venezuelan warship turned west at last, turbines humming briefly before the sound was swallowed by wind and distance. No signal followed, only a measured withdrawal that felt less like retreat than ritual. Hamilton kept position for several minutes, the helicopter making one final sweep to confirm the separation. When the contact finally faded from radar, the ship seemed to exhale. On deck, vests were unbuckled, helmets set aside, and the log recorded the night's outcome. Hostile interference concluded. No shots fired. Below, conversation came slow, the quiet heavier than relief. The crew understood they had stood within inches of things getting worse, yet managed to hold a fragile balance few would ever see. At sea, the entire standoff had lasted less than an hour. But in the language of navies, it would echo for years. By 1810, 6:10 p.m., Hamilton was back on course, her engines humming low as the sea darkened around her. The seized cargo was sealed and tagged, the suspects confined under guard, and a short coded message to Key West confirmed the mission success before the radios fell silent again. Behind her, the Venezuelan cutter slipped into the horizon, its light swallowed by dusk. The adrenaline faded slowly, replaced by the mechanical rhythm of patrol, the steady vibration of steel against waves, the familiar hum that told the crew they had crossed another invisible line without firing a shot. They had upheld U.S. law, claimed maritime rights, and shown restraint where others might have reached for force. It was in every measure a victory built not on confrontation but on control. By dawn, new satellite images captured Hamilton still on station, her deck glinting under the rising sun. A single photograph taken from the Dolphin helicopter, two ships 1 mile apart, frozen in parallel, circulated quietly through intelligence channels. To most, it was an uneventful patrol. To those who understood its meaning, it was a message written in silence. Power held steady is still power displayed. The world now knew what had happened at sea. But in Washington, another question loomed larger. Would this silence hold? Or was it only the pause before the next confrontation? By sunrise, U.S. Coast Guard ship Hamilton had gone back to its patrol path along the eastern Caribbean, engines humming steadily under gray-blue light. The sea, now calm again, gave no hint of what had happened the night before. But across Washington, the incident echoed through every channel of power. Reports arrived in order. 1.1 tons of drugs seized, evidence verified, suspects in custody, and 0 shots fired. A mission that began as law enforcement had ended as a test of strategic restraint. And victory came not through dominance but through discipline. Within hours, the Venezuelan government issued an official protest. State media labeled the stop an act of maritime piracy, accusing the U.S. of breaking its sovereign patrol zone. Editorials in Caracas declared the Coast Guard's actions a provocation ordered by Washington. Yet the video told another story: a U.S. cutter maintaining international law, a foreign warship crossing into its path, and a professional crew that refused to take the bait. Inside the Pentagon, analysts called it a textbook example of gray zone warfare, operations that blurred the lines between peace and confrontation. The Venezuelan cutter hadn't attacked. It had tested. The Coast Guard hadn't fired. It had held the line. Both sides had played their roles in a quiet drama of deterrence, one that could have spiraled into global consequences if a single decision had gone wrong. For the United States, the message was clear. Maritime security is no longer defined by fleets of destroyers or aircraft carriers, but by discipline under pressure, by men and women who can make decisions on rolling decks under the eyes of the world. The Coast Guard, often overlooked beside the Navy, had once again proven its role as both shield and signal, military precision blended with moral restraint. Across the Caribbean, U.S. intelligence tracked new Venezuelan patrol routes. The pattern of shadowing continued, though never again as close as that night. The lesson had been received. Strength, it turned out, could speak in silence. As Hamilton steamed north toward Puerto Rico, the crew gathered briefly on deck, the American flag rising against the morning wind. Salt spray hit their faces, but the expressions were steady. They knew that what they had done would never make front-page news, but somewhere deep inside the chain of command, it mattered. It was proof that order still had a voice in an ocean full of noise. In an age where conflict hides beneath diplomacy, moments like this define what it means to stand watch. The U.S. Coast Guard didn't fire a shot, but it won a battle of presence, patience, and principle. If you believe America's strength is built not just on firepower but on discipline, then make sure to support the mission. Like this video, subscribe to Military Power, and stand with us as we uncover the battles shaping our world.